Wait a minute or two to see if more people join. All right. Thank you all for coming to Go Public Garden Days. It's an annual observance of American Public Gardens Association ongoing public gardens campaign to drive attention and attendance to botanical gardens and arboreta across North America and the world. We have 600 plus members across all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Canada, and around the world joining the celebration with public events and special offers during the week. We have, if you check out gopublicgardensdays.org, you can locate gardens in your area that are participating, and you can filter by the types of events happening in your area. So Alexandra, if you want to say a little more.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us tonight. Just as a reminder, tonight's presentation is with the Arboretum State Botanical Garden of Kentucky, the Arboretum at Penn State, the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center, and the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. So we've got a great lineup tonight. Thanks for joining us, guys, and definitely check out the rest of the week. If you guys have to leave during the presentation, I do just want to remind you that these are recorded. So those the video recordings will be posted to the page. You can always go back, check them out. The site will be live for a while. And just in terms of Q&A, we definitely love getting questions. Just submit those in the chat, and there should be a Q&A by Zoom. And at the end of the presentation, we can ask our presenters. So with that, I'm excited to announce our first presenters for the evening or the afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. We've got Molly Davis, the director at the Arboretum State Botanical Garden of Kentucky, and Dawn Bailey, the education coordinator. So with that, I will over the reins to them.
Great. Well, thanks, Alexandra, and thanks, Brianna. I'm going to make sure you all can see my screen. Hope everybody can see that. Hello, and I hope that whatever time zone you're in, it's as lovely an afternoon or evening as we're having here in Kentucky. As was stated earlier, our name is the Arboretum, State Botanical Garden of Kentucky. We are the state's official botanical garden, but we are not the state's official arboretum. So I always try and let people know that because it can be a little confusing. We are page down. We are a partnership between the city of Lexington, Kentucky, and the University of Kentucky. And we are located in Lexington, Kentucky, kind of at the heart of the state. That's the bluegrass region of the state. And we are on land owned by the University of Kentucky, but we're stated back in 1987 that we would be a partnership between the two entities. And I am so sorry, I have lost my screen, my forward button. There we go, sorry. And so Dawn Bailey is also on this webinar with me. Thank you, Dawn. And Dawn and I have put our heads together. She and I have done an awful lot of different kinds of programming during COVID-19. And it's interesting because every arboretum and botanical garden is different, but they all have some similarities. And so I think, like a lot of places, we have a mission that is all about serving as a horticultural center and a resource center for environmental and horticultural education, research, and conservation. Educational and horticultural education is the foundation of all the programming that we offer. We have a children's garden, which Dawn coordinates. It has been closed during COVID, but when it is open, it has programming every day. It's a wonderful place, and Dawn's going to talk to you a bit more about that in a minute. We're also a University of Kentucky or UK resource. As with any land grant institution, our university has a mission of teaching, research, and kind of helping out in the community. And many UK faculty and instructors bring their classes to our facility. Things like dendrology, plant ID, also ag education, children's education, different kinds of classes. Most of them have some kind of natural or resource-based function of them. We also are encouraged to have research projects, and various faculty at UK and staff have research projects that we can kind of help them fulfill their research needs. Currently, we have someone who is collecting flowers that are used, I guess, by pollinators would be the best way to describe it, in wine production. That's something very new for us. And then of course, it also matters because we have a really big group of committed volunteers, some of whom have been coming here for 20 years or longer. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. So as with many gardens that are part of university, we are a gateless garden, meaning we have no mechanism to kind of count how many people exactly come in and go out. So we have kind of a rule of thumb that we take the number of people who sign into our guest book, which is in our visitor center, which has been closed since March of last year. From those registrations, even then in 2019, we had 46 out of 50 states represented. And we had visitors from, you can see all the countries that they came from. So it's really all over the world, which is incredibly cool. There were about 2,000 people who came on self-guided trips or tours with a group or a class, almost 13,000 at the Children's Garden, and then close to 400 attended our educational programming. So I did a quick kind of calculation and figured if that represents about 5% of the people who come, probably have about $300,000 visitors per year. And I think kind of the funny thing that we say too is we have a parking lot with 150 spaces and it's almost always full, especially if it's a nice day. So we have a lot of visitors and we don't know who they all are, but we sure do a really put a lot of effort toward providing educational programming and landscapes and plants for people to see. As I said earlier, or Alexandra did, I'm the director and Dawn is the education coordinator. We have really 8 core staff and a garden that measures 100 acres. So we are very low on staff and but high on, I think, things that people want to come and see and experience. We recently have been working with someone in the writing, rhetoric and digital design program in the College of Arts and Sciences at UK to do a survey. And it's kind of interesting because we're using the survey information to inform our interpretive plan, something that we have long thought we needed to help people better understand what they're seeing. And Dr. Cagle put out a survey both to people who don't come to the Arboretum by going to various places in Lexington to see what they had to say, and then to people who have seen the Arboretum. And what really strikes me about the slide I'm showing you here is these are the things that people who've never been there think we're about, that we're peaceful and have nature and gardens and trees and the typical things you would expect. But when you then bring that idea, that survey to people who have been there, you see how much more rich and nuanced and just, I think it's so fascinating seeing these various words. So these are some images that we think really convey the best parts about the Arboretum to everyone. As I said earlier, we're 100 acres. We have a visitor center, which we're currently in the process of raising money to expand and renovate. The Walk Across Kentucky comprises the largest part of our facility at about 65 acres. The Arboretum Woods is a inner bluegrass remnant woodland, meaning the trees in there have not been cut down for approximately 300 years. It is very unique in an urban location to have this kind of great remnant of what land used to be like. And it is a very often used part of the Arboretum for classes in forestry and natural resources. Then we have horticultural gardens and displays at about 4 acres and the Kentucky Children's Garden, which is about 2 acres. And those 3 features are also how we have our staff kind of divided up really to native plants in the Walk Across Kentucky, our horticulture team who cares for our horticultural gardens, our children's garden staff, and then admin staff. So one of the things that I think is really unique about our place, our Walk Across Kentucky, for example, is you can see here, this is kind of a map of the overall Arboretum. And here's a map of Kentucky. Kentucky has 7 physiographic regions in the state. And those physiographic regions have very different soils, very different plant types that grow there, different kinds of landscapes. And all the plants that a visitor might see as they walk around the property in this path, which we call the Walk Across Kentucky, all of the plants that you see growing here, which some are near 30, 35 years old, were wild collected from the various parts of the state that they represent and then brought to this bluegrass location. So for instance, over here in the Appalachian Plateau in the eastern part of the state, which many people have heard of, It has very acidic soils, lots of rhododendron, laurels, beech trees, pines, those kinds of things. All the things that people see in the Appalachian Plateau at the Arboretum were wild collected as seed, grown until they got large enough to be planted out, and then grown to what they see now. And I realize there may be some questions about this, and I hope that if there are questions, you can put that in the chat box. Some of the images I'm going to show you are just vistas across the Arboretum. This, for example, is the Shawnee Hills part of the Arboretum that's looking back on our visitor center. This is our Mississippi embayment wetland. We have a very large boardwalk that goes through a wetland area. And this is it kind of at the height of summer when it's very lush and verdant. On the left is a view in the Appalachian Plateau through some of the trees there. Whereas on the right, we see the Shawnee Hills Meadow kind of in the lower part of the photograph, which is something that we're trying to increase the amount of prairies that we have in the Arboretum rather than mown grass. Surprisingly, you can't just let plants grow up and expect to see a meadow or a prairie. They're very labor intensive in terms of the amount of things you have to apply. I hate to say herbicides, things that take care of killing the existing vegetation, usually 2 years in a row, and then seeding with a plant mixture that's appropriate. And then we also have a burn regime on about a 3 to 5 year rotation we treat all our prairies with. And I was mentioning that how important volunteers are. Here you see at the, especially at the lower left, is in the Arboretum woods where people are trying to take care of honeysuckle. We have a big problem in all parts of the Arboretum with if we pull out honeysuckle, the invasive kind of honeysuckle, we then seem to have a lot of euonymus, and it is a hard thing to get rid of. As you may know if you're from another part of the country that has that problem. I mentioned earlier the Arboretum Woods, and it is about 15 acres and it's contiguous with the walk across Kentucky, but it's not an area that we manage as actively. About 15 years ago, there was a concerted effort to remove the invasive honeysuckle, and what came out when we did that was this creeping euonymus that is really kind of consuming the forest floor. And the previous photograph, I'll just go back to that, shows where we are trying to plant various kinds of rye and other kinds of grasses that can tolerate shade to eventually become the plants that take over where, you know, if you have any kind of void, anything where you've taken out the plant material, something's going to come in there. We're trying to encourage better plant material than euonymus. And this photograph shows, I mentioned that some of the trees in there are up to 300 years old. This was a tree that came down during an ice storm. I think it was in 2004. A huge tree came down. It was an oak, and we sawed through the middle of it so that people had a pathway through because it was one of our major pathways. And now we interpret kind of the various parts of Kentucky's history of, you know, what moment in time did Daniel Boone come through Kentucky, and when did we become a state, and, you know, things like that. So that's our fallen oak. I mentioned also that our other kind of big feature is horticultural gardens and displays. This area in the core here that I'm kind of mousing around was the first part of the Arboretum that was constructed back in 1992 and 3. That was before there was a visitor center. It was when we simply had a path in the dirt around the perimeter of the Arboretum, no visitor center, no paved parking. The horticultural gardens have expanded to include not only the home demonstration gardens and all of its gardens, but also various displays, a witch hazel dell. We have All American Selections trials, a fragrance garden. We have a memorial here to a plane crash that happened in 2007, I believe. And we have just recently started to turn our rose garden into a perennial teaching garden, possibly because you can see how shady it is in our home demonstration garden. And we needed a sunnier location. We found we just couldn't manage 2 acres of rose care without more funds. These are some images. On the left is one of our annual display beds. On the right, you can see what was the rose garden with the visitor center in the background. Here we have the wedding garden. Kentucky's kind of signature kind of wall is a dry laid stone wall, and we have those in several places in the Arboretum. Here we have more of the wedding garden, a really nice pergola that has wisteria covering it. Not this year because the wisteria got zapped by a very late freeze. And on the right, a city garden. We have several sculptures with water features, and it's kind of a nice place to be in summer. And it's been very nice during COVID to be able to say to people who bring their children, when they're so disappointed that the children's garden is closed, go take a walk in the home demonstration gardens, because there are various water features, a fish pond. You can kind of dribble your fingers in the water and have some cool spots there. Here is a pergola, another pergola with a tropical display. Dawn is very, put together the PowerPoint and wanted you to be sure and know that we have a vegetable garden. Interestingly, at the university, we aren't allowed to eat any food, take any flowers, do anything like that. All of the food that we grow in our demonstration vegetable garden and demonstration herb garden are grown and then given to an organization, and in this case, Glean Kentucky, who redistributes it to those who are in need. And we know that that's a really great thing to be able to provide fresh vegetables for people who need that. And I'm sorry, but I've lost, there you are. And these are some of our volunteer work days in the vegetable garden. Again, before COVID, back in 2019, it's a group of about 7 people who work every Monday with our folks to weed and plant and maintain and learn about vegetables and vegetable gardening. And this slide tells me that it's time for Dawn to talk to you about the Kentucky Children's Garden.
Thank you, Molly. We're about to talk about what I think is the best part, the best 2 acres of the Arboretum, the Kentucky Children's Garden. It's spectacular, and it really has a huge impact on the lives of the children that come and visit us. This is an aerial view of the Kentucky Children's Garden. Like I said, it's 2 acres, and it's kind of divided up into the native side. So everything to the right you see is going to be a native plant to Kentucky, whereas everything on the left side of the garden could be native or non-native. And everything on the right with those native plants represents a different part of Kentucky's landscape or Kentucky history. And then, so I'm going to go ahead and Molly, ask you to go to the next slide. So the first thing that you see when you walk into the Kentucky Children's Garden are our misters. And they're really fun. It's not water that's shooting out, it's just mist. So it really helps the kids cool off in the summertime. And it's also in the shape of a quilt, which is really important to Kentucky heritage, as we are the quilting capital of the United States. And something that would have been taking place during pioneer days and even today here in Kentucky. And in each one of the squares that make up the quilt is a native plant of Kentucky. And each square the mist will turn off, and then it'll turn back on, then all the mist turns off, then all of them turn back on, and the kids just run around and have a blast. And I would really like to share a meaningful story that took place at the misters. We had a grandmother who brought her grandson here every day for a solid week. It was their first time coming, and she was so happy. She wanted to share with me that she had her first picture of her grandson smiling, and he was 5 years old, that she had ever gotten here playing in the misters at the Kentucky Children's Garden. It's just a place where kids can be free and explore nature and connect with nature, and it has a huge impact. Let's go to the next slide, Molly. Thank you. One thing that I forgot to mention is that this is the only part of the Arboretum that we charge for. So we charge daily admission, and we have memberships. It's $3 per person. Any child 2 or under is free. And that's just because we offer such great activities and the cost that it takes to maintain those activities. What you're looking at right now is the Nature Center. And before COVID, every day we would have educational programming in that nature center at specific times throughout the day. We do hands-on learning activities such as talking about the water cycle and building a cloud in a jar, or talking about birds. And we take laminated birds and we pin them up through the trees, and we have really small binoculars, and the kids practice identifying birds and practice using binoculars. And if we're not having educational programming in the nature center, we might be planting something in one of the gardens. Of course, we're in an arboretum, our focus is on planting. And we have several gardens that we're gonna look through in the next couple slides that the kids help take care of. They help plant them, they help harvest. And Molly, if you would like to go ahead and go to the next slide. We can see that right here. This is our pioneer cabin. This is an actual pioneer cabin from Kentucky that real people lived in more than 100 years ago. And it has been resized for children, and so that it doesn't take too much space up in our garden. And next to it is our pioneer garden, where, like I said, kids help plant cultivars of vegetables and fruits that would have been actually grown by the pioneers during this time in Kentucky. And as Molly mentioned earlier, all the vegetables that we grow is donated to Glean Kentucky, which gets those fruits and veggies to people who need it in Kentucky. And the kids will help harvest that, and they can learn about that process. And also in our log cabin, we have all kinds of things for the kids to pretend that they're a pioneer. They have clothes that they wash on a washboard, then hang up to dry, pots and pans. And we have some old timey plows that the kids push to plow a row in the garden. Molly, would you like to go to the next slide? So we have two pictures here of the two streams that we have that are flowing through the garden. And it's a great safe space for kids to get in, play in the water, cool off. They can build a dam if they want to, using the limestone rocks. And there's a lot of limestone throughout the garden because that is so important here in Kentucky, as over half of our bedrock is made out of limestone, all of it here in the bluegrass. And these two streams join up and they come to make the pond. And Molly, if you'll go to the next slide. And that's right here. The streams feed into this pond, and we have tadpoles, we have mosquito fish, we have one slider turtle named Rocky that the kids love. Occasionally we see green heron in this pond, and we have frog eggs. And right there in the center of the pond, you can see a boat. That boat kids can actually get on, and it floats, and we have little nets, and they can catch the tadpoles, they can catch the minnows. And we have pretend fishing poles, and they can pretend to go fishing, and they love it. It also represents an important part of Kentucky history, as long boats would go down the Ohio River, down the Kentucky River, and that was an important mode of transportation prior to trains coming into Kentucky. All right, Molly, if you would go to the next slide. This is another favorite place for kids where they can just be free and dig, because kids love that. They love getting messy. And we have several kids that come just for this, to dig for 2 hours. And I feel bad for the parents that have to sit in the sun and are so bored by watching their child dig for 2 hours on the same hole. But they love it, and it's great for the kids. And again, you can see that that stone wall behind the kids in the Kentucky Children's Garden that is all across landscapes here in the bluegrass, and also incorporated into our children's garden. Molly, if you'd like to go to the next slide. This part of the garden represents transportation. here in Kentucky, trains played an important part in transportation, as well as many other parts of the state. And this train set has 2 tracks, one on the bottom, one on the top. Percy and Thomas are our trains, almost forgot his name for a second, are our trains that are most popular with the kids. And we run them several times a day. The entire track is made out of natural materials made by Applied Imagination, which is a company here in Kentucky, in northern Kentucky, as well as the small buildings that dot the train tracks, which are all made out of natural materials as well. And Molly mentioned our volunteers. We have many volunteers that are very devoted to the KCG, and none more so than our volunteers that are devoted to this train track, because it takes a lot of work. I don't know if you can tell, but the little boy in the picture to the left is in the process of trying to leap over the fence to get to the train and ride it, pick it up, I don't know. But we have several volunteers that come every day to take care of the trains, to watch the kids and make sure that the trains aren't accidentally destroyed, because accidents happen. This is a favorite of all the children, and really makes the KCG special because it's an outside beautiful train track that the kids just go wild for. All right, Molly, if you wouldn't mind, the next slide. In addition to all of this, here are some more of our gardens. We have a butterfly garden in the upper left-hand corner, and we are adding 2 butterfly habitats this summer so that the kids can watch the cycle of life for the butterflies. So they can watch them go from egg to caterpillar to chrysalis and then release them in the butterfly garden. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have our raised beds, and these are themed. Every year they have a different theme. They might be all the plants that it takes to make a pizza. It might be all the plants it takes to make a shirt. We could have an area just for perennials, an area for native plants. This year, we're going to have an area for plants that attract night insects, as well as a sensory garden so that kids can feel all the different plants. We, of course, also grow vegetables and fruit here, and we do tastings on the weekends. It's really fun to watch this part of the garden, because kids will try things that they would never try if you just served it to them on a plate at home. They will try all kinds of vegetables and fruits, and they're interested and they want to harvest it themselves and then wash it off and be able to sample it, and they have a good experience then associated with that healthy fruit or vegetable. And I think that's a really important thing to help kids connect with healthy foods emotionally, have a good emotional connection with it. And they also get to help water and plant both of these gardens. So Molly, if you would like to go to the next slide. That was a little bit about a little virtual tour of the Kentucky Children's Garden. Now I'm going to talk about events, which is another part of my job, and something that we all do at the Arboretum. Our horticulturist and our curator also teach many classes. These are all the classes and events that we had in 2019, and it's quite a lot. I'm not going to go through all of them. Arbor Day is our biggest celebration that we have every year. And in the KCG, we have several large events where we have tables set up from different organizations throughout Lexington. And we pretty much couldn't do any of this in the way that we normally could during 2020 and into 2021. So we had to adapt, just like all of us have, and change them up. And so this year, thanks to American Public Garden Association, we were given ideas of how to do this. And we came up with a couple activities that we could safely do. And Molly, if you could go to the next slide. That included several take and make activities that were very successful with our Arboretum community. We did a kissing ball, which we had done in years past as an actual class. But this year they just drove up, picked up their kit, drove home, and we created videos to teach them how to do it. Same thing for the terrarium kits. We also had several trivia nights. This was an idea that we got from US Botanical Garden. They had some successful trivia nights, which proved to be very successful for us in Kentucky as well. A great way for us to connect with our volunteers who we were desperately missing, both because of the help that they gave us and just as people. And then we also had a Kentucky Nature Trivia series, which was very successful as well. And we had about 40 people at each one of our trivias. And Molly's going to show you a picture of that here in a second. Here we go. So this is all of us at trivia. You can see we had a pretty good turnout. It was a lot of fun. We had excellent plant prizes for the winners. And I think we all learned a lot. There were some, we hosted some, of course, but we also had a partnership with some other organizations that hosted trivia nights. And I feel like I learned a lot at all of these events and was really impressed with the knowledge base that our community has. So that's a little bit about our educational programming that we have had through 2020 and 2021. Before we close out, I would like to highlight some of the plants that we have in the collections. This is a plant that we have in the Kentucky Children's Garden. This is a prickly pear, and this is the only cacti that grows in Kentucky. And having grown up in Kentucky, I had no idea that this even existed, but it grows in really dry soils, usually on, between, or next to limestone so that it can absorb some of that heat. And their beautiful flowers have a very interesting adaptation. If you touch them with a pen or your finger, they will respond. They'll start to move. And they'll close up like a flower closing when the sun goes down. And scientists believe that this is an adaptation that allows the flowers to protect their pollen from insects that would just want to feed off the pollen, but wouldn't successfully pollinate the plant. So when it closes up, smaller insects can't get to the pollen quite as well. Whereas larger insects like bumblebees would still be able to push the stamen aside and access the pollen, feed, and then also pollinate the plants. So this is a plant that's in the Kentucky Children's Garden. And like many of the other plants that are in the Kentucky Children's Garden, each one of them is an opportunity, if a kid asks a question, to have an interpretive moment, to have a moment to help that child connect with a plant that grows where he lives, and hopefully inspire him to care about that plant and to care about all the plants around him and about his ecosystem, about his or her ecosystem. So now I'm gonna show you some, oh, Molly, would you mind stopping sharing? Thank you. I'm gonna show you a couple plants from other collections that we have in the Walk Across Kentucky. I'm sorry, I'm going to show you another tree that we have in the Walk Across Kentucky. That is the native plant collection that Molly talked about earlier. Every plant or most plants in this collection are wild collected, and that's why I would like to highlight this American sycamore that you're looking at right now. The curator back in 2011, who was before Emily Ellingson, collected this seed from Jessamine County that grew into this tree you're seeing. He was in Jessamine County, which is about a county over from where we are right now, and he couldn't reach the seed. He couldn't use a pruner to get the seed because it was too high. So he took a shotgun and he shot down one of the small branches, and the seeds fell to the ground, and those seeds were then germinated. And one of the saplings was planted in 2014, and that's the tree that you see here today. So that's just one example of all of the plants in that collection that are all wild collected, and this one just has a very interesting story behind it.
A very Kentucky story.
Okay, so I'm going to highlight one more plant. Let me pull the video up. Sorry, guys. All right. So this is river cane, and this is all, when they're all growing together like this, we call this a cane break. And this again is in the Walk Across Kentucky Native Plant Collection. And I love this plant because I didn't know that it existed as well, having grown up in Kentucky. And that's because we only have about 2% of the cane breaks left in the eastern southern United States because of habitat loss, because of farming, because of overgrazing, because of change in burn patterns. And this plant is an important part of what the ecosystem would have been because it sustains habit. It's a host plant for caterpillars, and it prevents erosion. And this plant also plays an important role in the history here in Kentucky. As I mentioned earlier, Kentucky has a lot of limestone, which is a rock that lends itself to a karst topography because it's so easily dissolved. Many of you may know that Mammoth Cave, the longest cave in the world, is here in Kentucky, and that's because of the limestone. And in many of the caves throughout Kentucky, you find pieces of this plant, the river grass, burnt in about this long. And that's because the indigenous people, the American Indians, were exploring the caves throughout Kentucky using this plant as a torch. And this is another interpretive moment that we use this cane break for students and other visitors coming on tours. So those are just a couple of my favorite plants that I think are very special here at the Arboretum. And I'm gonna stop sharing. So thank you all for listening about some of my favorite plants. I don't know, Molly, if you'd like to close us out.
There we go. Thank you, Dawn.
Oh, Molly, you're still muted.
I think I'm okay. So I just
Molly, you're still muted.
No, I'm not.
No, you're good. I can.
Okay, maybe it's not gonna work.
No.
If she gets back,
No.
we'll let her say something. But I would just like to thank you all for taking the time to learn about the Arboretum, State Botanical Garden of Kentucky. It is a truly beautiful place, and we'd love to have you come visit once it's safe for you to do so. And I think now we are going to open it up to questions.
Yeah,
So if you
guys
have any questions, feel free to send it into the chat.
Yep, we
I'm
have.
gonna go ahead and check the chat.
Let's see.
Oh, somebody else could hear Molly. I couldn't hear Molly. My bad. Okay, I'm sorry, Molly. Would you like to close us out?
No, let's hear the questions.
Okay.
So right now I'm checking the Q&A, and it doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment. I'll just give it another couple seconds and see if anyone wants to submit anything, but great presentation. That children's garden looks amazing.
It is.
Thanks, Alexandra, and thanks, Brianna. And really, I think we failed to put our website address up there, but that's the best way to stay in touch with us. It's we're part of the College of Agriculture, Food and Environment at UK, so it's arboretum.ca.uky.edu. We use our website. We have a Facebook page. It's where we really get all of our information across.
Mm-hmm. We also have an Instagram if you'd like to follow us on there. We often will post pictures of the trees and other plants that are growing with fun facts about them.
Yeah. Cool. And thanks APGA for organizing this and for doing this. It's really, that used to be Public Garden Day, then Public Garden Week, and now it's Public Garden 9 days. So it's just really a nice way to celebrate public gardens, which we're thrilled to be a member of.
Yeah, thank you so much for participating here and show everyone all the great gardens we have all over the US.
Absolutely.
All right, so our next presentation is with the Arboretum at Penn State. They start at 7 o'clock. So It looks like we might have a few minutes of a break here. If anyone wants to submit a question, please feel free to do so. We're going to go ahead and get that second presentation lined up, and we'll move right along. So thank you, guys.
Sounds great. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Take care.
All right, so it looks like we have got Tim Gould here from the Arboretum at Penn State. Just on time, we have just wrapped up with our first presentation. We are getting ready to move on to the next one. If you're ready, we can also test your screen share and see what else you need from us, but we are looking forward to it.
Great, awesome. All righty. Well, I will go ahead and give my screen share a try here. Let's see. I have a video pulled up. There we go. All righty. So, Alexander, am I good to just go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I would say just to let you guys know, again, it's the Arboretum at Penn State, and tonight we have their public programs manager joining us, Tim Gould. And with that, I will let you take it away.
All righty, awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, I would have introduced myself. Sorry about that. So like Alexander said, my name is Tim Gould. I'm the public programs manager at the Arboretum at Penn State, which is the Arboretum here at Pennsylvania State University, which is located right in the center of Pennsylvania for anybody who hasn't been here before. And so what we have for you this evening is just about a 10-minute video showcasing where we are as a fairly young garden, and also some glimpses at where we're hoping to go over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, and then even beyond that. So we're excited to be able to share this with you. And afterwards, I'm going to stick around for a couple minutes and answer as many questions as I can. Alrighty, so I'll go ahead and get started.
Welcome to the Arboretum at Penn State and this virtual tour of our gardens. Visiting the H.O. Smith Botanic Gardens in the Arboretum at Penn State is like moving through the rooms of a house. Each garden is a room with its own unique character. Some spaces are given to restful contemplation, others to playful discovery, or friendly gatherings. If you are walking into the Arboretum from the Penn State campus, you will cross a bridge that spans natural-looking landscape covered by waving switchgrass. The marsh meadow preserves a sensitive hydrological zone where stormwater filters into the ground. Visitors who arrive by car usually start their tour at the Overlook Pavilion. This environmentally friendly building hosts weddings and special performances that are viewed from the lawn in the middle of the Arboretum's strolling garden. In the autumn, crowds come to the lawn for a display of hundreds of lighted jack-o'-lanterns carved for the annual Pumpkin Festival. At the end of Penn State's fall semester, they return for the winter celebration concert and lighted tree display. As visitors walk the strolling garden, they encounter additional garden rooms. Childhood's Gate Children's Garden is a magical space where a visitor might spot a bear peeking out of a stone wall, or a bronze owl watching from above. At the back of the garden, a sculpted tree stump and giant caterpillar invite visitors to imagine themselves shrunk to the size of an ant. Even in this fanciful realm, the garden maintains a connection to the natural world. The giant mushrooms, native boletes. The caterpillar, an enormous version of a real spicebush swallowtail caterpillar, surrounded by a grove of spicebush plants, the animal's preferred food source. At the back of the children's garden is a locked gate. This gate leads to a pollinator and bird garden that is scheduled to open in summer 2021. The new garden will have a range of habitats, from shady woodlands to open meadows and wetlands, all designed to attract the largest possible number of bird and insect species. One of the most interesting features contains trees that are over 300 years old, saved from the logger's axe by soil that was too shallow to plow and a complicated system of land ownership. This woodlot is now the location of our wildflower trail, where hikers can enjoy ephemeral native species like wild columbine, trilliums, and rue anemone, restored to the woods by a corps of community volunteers. The Wildflower Trail leads you to the Bellefonte Rail Trail, which runs along an abandoned spur of the railroad that once carried students and freight to the Penn State campus. The rail trail leads you past a 12-acre limestone prairie. We don't often think of prairies as having been present in the eastern woodlands, but they were common and sometimes quite large on shallow limestone soils in the Ridge and Valley province of the Appalachian Mountains. This natural community type has become exceedingly rare in Pennsylvania, but we are aggressively pursuing a restoration, or more appropriately, a recreation, through the use of targeted plantings and periodic controlled burns. As you might imagine, controlled burns adjacent to campus and community are exciting events. Returning from the woods, you might pause on the watershed map to look back over the natural lands, feeling like a giant as you sit on one of the rocks representing our local mountains. From this quiet spot, you can watch the sun sink over our iconic red elm and plan your next visit.
Alrighty, so that was just a brief look at all the different spaces and places that make up the Arboretum here at Penn State. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if folks have them. I will say right up front that I am one of the Arboretum's newest employees, so I might not have the answer to all of your questions, but I'm happy to do what I can and field any additional questions through email as well. Actually, I'll go ahead and I'll put my email in the chat just so folks have it if they want to get in touch with me.
All right, we can give it a few minutes for questions, see if anyone has anything. Thanks for the great video, Tim. I really enjoyed it. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. We had a lot of fun putting it together.
So I saw, so you said that there's a lot of new additions coming to the garden.
Mm-hmm.
What's kind of the, you said there's like a glass house coming, like is there like a whole plan, or are you, where are you in the process of creating your garden?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our newest addition is going to be our 3-acre Pollinator and Bird Garden, which is going to open this coming summer, hopefully in June. We're dealing with some scheduling problems, as everyone is with COVID, but hopefully that'll be open in June. And then there is a larger strategic plan for the Arboretum, but we are almost entirely funded. Over 95% of our funding comes from philanthropy. And so it really depends on identifying donors who have particular interest in supporting different areas of the Arboretum and different areas of the strategic plan. And that plan does change a little bit as we find out what donors are passionate about and what they'd like to see at the Arboretum at Penn State. So we are a little bit at the whim of people caring enough to make a gift. But it's really nice that the community is so involved and so invested in the Arboretum as well. So like I said during the video, the Pollinator and Bird Garden is going to be done soon, and the next project is going to be the Art Museum. And then from there, it's really kind of still up in the air, which is exciting. We know we're going to keep expanding, but we're never entirely sure where the next expansion is going to be.
Nice. Yeah, that is exciting. See what happens.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in. So I'm going to thank you oh, looks like we do have one.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So there is a bidding process going on at the university for what's going to go into the old museum. And I don't know any of the details of that because that is several levels above my pay grade, for better or worse. But I know that there are a number of people that are interested in being in that space. So it could be potentially classroom space. One of the other museums at the university could move into that space. It's already set up as a museum, so that might be a good use. But really it depends on who expresses interest and need. And then it's up to the university from there. And I see one other question here from Kathleen. Is campus open to the public? Yes, campus is open to the public. There are COVID guidelines, which are on Penn State's main website. And the Arboretum has COVID guidelines as well, which are posted not only with signage on site, but also on the Arboretum's website. So you can find out more information about all of that there. But yes, campus and the Arboretum are open to the public. And Roberta, you had one more question. Will the new art museum be environmentally friendly? Yes, it is going to follow a lot of the same design principles that our smaller building followed. So it will be an environmentally friendly building. I don't know what all that entails. We are still very much in the design process for the building. I believe actually the Board of Trustees for the university just publicly approved the project this week. So we're still very much in the design phase of that, but I know that we are planning on incorporating a lot of the environmentally friendly aspects that went into the original Arboretum building into this new building as well. These are good questions.
Yeah, they are. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for being here today, Tim. It was great to see your garden.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be part of this.
All right. Next up, we are going to move on to the desert. Our next garden is the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center. I don't believe any of their representatives are here with us today, but I am going to be playing for you a video tour of their facilities. So just give me 1 second to set that up for you.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lisa Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center and Botanical Gardens. We're located about 4 miles southeast of Fort Davis, Texas, in the foothills of the Davis Mountains. This area is 507 acres that we're on, and we have a unique setting in which we have a nature center and then also the Botanical Garden. The area that I'm standing in right now is our nature center side, and it's more of a rugged section with our 5 miles of hiking trails. The other side to my right is the Botanical Garden, which consists of 18 acres surrounded by a game fence. The fence is there to keep the wildlife out. The wildlife I'm speaking of consists of javelinas, which are colored peccary, the deer, which we have both mule deer and white-tailed deer, aoudad. The aoudad are also known as Barbary sheep, and they were imported here in 1955 from North Africa. And then we also have an occasional elk that'll wander up. The garden is fenced in just to keep them out. If they got inside, then they would have a big feast, and then we wouldn't have a garden for you to enjoy. Inside the Botanical Garden is a windy half-mile path that features native plants from the Trans-Pecos region. The Trans-Pecos region starts at the Pecos River, and it's all the land west of that river into the Big Bend region of Texas, and then to northern Mexico. We're at 5,100 feet elevation, and that makes us located in a sky island. A sky island is an area that has higher elevation than its surrounding area, and so it's like a desert oasis, and we capture more rainfall here through the year. So it's greener. We have a large diversity of plants up here also. Over my shoulder right here is the cactus collection in our greenhouse. We have over 200 species and subspecies of Chihuahuan desert cacti. The Chihuahuan desert is 220,000 square miles. It's mostly located in Mexico, and it is the largest warm desert in North America. We hope you can come visit us soon and experience the sights and sounds of the birds, the smells of the plants, the fragrances. The ash, the fragrant ash, got its name for a reason. And the plant behind me, the antelope bush, which is Persia placata, has the most fragrant smell. It captures you as you're coming around the curve on the trail. The colors all throughout the summer of the plants are vibrant shades of reds, purples, blue in the salvia bed, and the cenizas when they bloom after the rains here. It's every shade of purple imaginable. We hope you can come see us soon and enjoy the tour. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Seth Hamby and I'm the head gardener here at the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center and Botanical Gardens, where we have over 500 species of native Chihuahuan desert plants. Come on in and let's take a look. Oh, hello! Our 18-acre botanical garden is roughly laid out by elevation and plant family. Here, in our desert specialty garden, we feature many iconic low-elevation desert species such as agaves, yuccas, sotals, and bear grasses. These two beautiful trees are known as big-toothed maples, and they're the only naturally occurring maple in the Chihuahuan Desert. We're now in our Oaks and Friends section. Oaks are an incredibly important part of the ecology of the Chihuahuan Desert. Here in Trans-Pecos, Texas, there are 25 species of oaks naturally occurring. Within the entire Chihuahuan Desert, you can find 64 species of oaks. The diversity of habitat, elevation, as well as its proximity to other floristic provinces makes the Chihuahuan Desert a unique place. It provides habitat for many strange and unusual plants such as this Hinkley oak, which is a federally endangered species known from only 6 locations within the United States. Evidence from pack rat middens show that this species was once much more widespread than it is today. Welcome to our Fabaceae or legume family section. This large and diverse family includes plants like clover, soybean, chickpeas, alfalfa, and clover. We have almost 165 native and naturalized species within the Trans-Pecos region of Texas. This is our Acanthaceae family section, or the Acanthus family. Their tubular flowers are perfectly evolved for hummingbirds. Welcome to the Anacardiaceae or the sumac family. Members of this family include cashews, pistachios, and mangoes. There are 6 representative species of the sumac family in Trans-Pecos, Texas. Here we have the little leaf sumac. Check out those tiny little white flowers. Welcome to our rose family section. The rose family is known for its edible fruits such as blackberries, apples, peaches, and strawberries. Here in the Trans-Pecos, we have 24 species from this family. Our high elevation conifer forest is representative of some of the species that you'll find from 6,000 to 7,500 feet elevation in the Davis, Chisos, and Guadalupe mountain ranges. The increased precipitation and cooler temperatures provide a unique habitat for many different plants, such as these. The olive family, Oleaceae, has 13 representatives in Trans-Pecos, Texas, such as this, a fragrant ash. This Texas madrone is a member of the family Ericaceae, or the heath family, and is closely related to the blueberry. Welcome to our sage bed. This bed has members of the family Lamiaceae, or the mint family. This bed provides one of the greatest spectacles in the garden during the rainy summer months. This section is devoted to the family Scrophulariaceae, or the figwort family. This Cenizo forest, also called a barometer bush, often blooms after heavy summer rains. Hello, welcome to our pollinator garden. Here we have tons and tons of native plants that flower throughout the year and provide food for bees, wasps, butterflies, birds, and other insects. Let's take a look at this penstemon here. Notice the tubular red flowers are really attractive to hummingbirds. Agave is a genus of plants that are found in the Americas, and they're famously known for being used to make tequila. This is a rough agave. Notice the large inflorescence that is often visited by pollinating bats. Our collection consists of roughly 20 different cactus genera. These two tables are devoted to the genus Echinocerius, which is known for its large, showy blooms and is a favorite of our guests. We're ending our tour today in the Chinkapin Oak Grove. Many of these oaks are dedicated to founding members of CDRI. Thank you for joining me today on this tour, and I hope you come visit us soon.
All right, many thanks to the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center for that video. It was really cool to see a different sort of landscape than we often see. Since they're not here, I can't do Q&A, but I will put a link to their website in the chat in case you want to contact anyone. So now for our final presentation tonight, we're traveling a little further east in Texas to Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center at the University of Texas at Austin. And we have Michelle Bertelson here, who is an ecologist there. So I'll turn it over to you, Michelle.
Hi, so I'm going to be speaking today about our research program. Thanks for coming. Hello and welcome to our tour of our land management research area. My name is Michelle Bertelson and I'm an ecologist here at the center. We've been working on this research for about 20 years. So I'm just going to take you through a little tour of the plots, show you some of the things we found, and should be fun. So most people, if you are familiar with the Wildflower Center, this is the view you think of. So wildflowers, gardens, this view, and that is certainly true. This is one of my favorite spots in the Wildflower Center. So in the foreground here, we have a garden. It's a maintained garden, and it's one of the prettiest, I think, that we have. But if you look at the background, there's something else going on. It hints to something else happening at the Wildflower Center. And so that background looks a little bit charred, and it is because we have set it on fire. So this is a natural area that backs right up to the gardens, and it is maintained with prescribed fire. And the reason that we do that is that we are here in Central Texas at the southern end of the Great Plains, which is a grassland system that goes through the center of this continent. And it is a fire maintained system. So in many areas we have enough rain for woodlands, but we don't have the woodlands because the fire kept them in check. And so this is a historical disturbance that these communities need. And so we've put it back in our land management. This is sort of an image of a healthy midgrass prairie system that you would find in the hill country. So in the foreground, you've got the sea of grass, but then in the hills, you have more of that woodland. And so you get this patchy landscape, and the fire helps maintain that. But we're not content just to use the tool, we also want to understand it. And so since about the year 2000, we've been conducting land management research. And so the treatments are fire, prescribed fire, and prescribed mowing. And they happen in 3 different seasons: summer, winter, and fall. And then there are also plots that we don't do anything to. Those are our controls that we are just watching. And so this is the basic layout of the plots. And so in the top of the screen, you can see for scale, most of what people think of when they think of the Wildflower Center. Those are all the buildings in the central gardens and the parking lot. But then to the south, most of the area is actually devoted to research. And so the red plots, each plot is about 1.5 acres. The red ones are burn plots, the yellow ones are mow plots, and the green ones are controls. So each plot has one treatment applied to it. So a summer plot will be burned only in the summer. A summer mow plot will be mowed only in the summer. And those treatments happen every 3 to 5 years. And then there's one extra mow treatment, which is called a frequent mow treatment. And those are mowed 3 times a year, every year. And what we're trying to do is tease out how individual species respond to these treatments and how the community as a whole responds to the treatments. And so this is kind of a visual representation of what we're trying to tease out. And so on the left, we have Black-Eyed Susan, and you can see a line where the Black-Eyed Susan stops. And the difference there is the left side of that line was burned in the summer, and the right side of that line is a summer mow. And so just those 2 treatments vastly changed the composition of what we're looking at. This is a little bit more dramatic. So on the left-hand side, we've got Indian blanket, and on the right, again, the Black-Eyed Susan. And so the Black-Eyed Susan really like the summer burns. That's where we see them. The Indian blanket like every other treatment, except for the summer burns. And so this difference, these pictures were taken on the same day. It's the same soil type. They're within sight of each other. The only difference is the treatment. And that's what we're trying to pull out. And so this is probably a competitive interaction going on. The Indian blanket on the left is a very strong competitor, and the Black-Eyed Susan less so. And so we think that the Black-Eyed Susan is taking advantage of the Indian blanket not being as present on those summer burn plots and expanding. And that's what we're trying to figure out. And ultimately, we're trying to encourage that kind of diversity. We want lots of species. And the reason that we're doing this, or the reason we originally were doing this, is to help land managers. So people managing land for forage, people managing parks, people managing for habitat. There are a wide variety of reasons that people are managing land and trying to get particular effects. And so what we're trying to do is get nuanced information for these people so that they know how these communities respond to the treatments, but then we're also looking at how the weather and the climate interacts with these treatments, which is why it's so important that this be so long-term. Now, the next question that I get tends to be, how do you do the prescribed fires? And so we're just going to walk through one here. This is one of our plots. And so the beginning of every prescribed fire starts with a backing fire. And so this is a slow moving fire that's pushing into the wind. And so it can't go very fast because the wind, it's going against the wind. And so you put the fire down and then you basically put out the downwind side, the side that would go with the wind. And then you just let it creep back. Now we have two teams here working together to sort of ring this plot. And so they need to stay even with each other. They can't get ahead of each other so that we're going to use the fire itself to contain it. So right now, this is what's called a flanking fire. So the fire is perpendicular to the wind. Now here in just a moment, we'll see both teams will pause for a moment. And that's because they're getting to the point where when they turn that corner, they'll be having a head fire. So they need to make sure two things. One, that both teams are even with each other, and two, that we have enough black. So that area behind where the fire was is called the black. It's all the fuel has been burned away. It won't burn again. And that's what's actually going to stop the head fire. And so they're even, they've got enough black. And so now they're going to go ahead and meet up in the middle and start the head fire. And the head fire goes with the wind. So it moves faster, it's more intense. And this is what we have all that black to stop. So here goes our head fire, and the backing fire and the head fire are going to be drawn to each other and come into the center and extinguish each other. So there, that's our first prescribed fire for you guys to see. And I like to see those nice clean burn lines. So beyond doing the treatments, I'm not going to show you mowing, but the other fun thing that we do is we go out twice a year in the spring and in the fall, and we identify all the plants and we estimate their cover. So this is our vegetation survey going on. And this is what we're looking at. So every plot has a 50-meter transect, a 50-meter line laid down on it in the same place every time. And then we put these 1-meter quads down and identify all the plants in them, and then estimate how much of the ground that each species covers. And so in your head right now, I'd like you to just guess how many species you think are in that little quad. So that's a 1 by 1 meter quad. A meter is roughly a yard. Most people will guess 5 to 6. It looks like about 5 to 6. This is the data sheet from that quad. And so on each one of those codes is a species that's in there. And in that 1 meter quad, we had 25 species. So that's the kind of diversity that we're looking at and that we're trying to rebuild. So I'm standing here on one of our frequent mow plots. So this plot is mowed 3 times a year every year, in the summer, in the fall, and in the winter. Now that's a lot of mowing for a natural area, but it's not very much mowing for a more constructed area, a downtown area. And so originally when this treatment was put down, it was to simulate grazing. We would love to have had some cows out here, but it just wasn't logistically possible. So we mowed because we wanted to find out if mowing and burning were equivalent, and we've sort of found out that they're not. But these plots, these frequent mow plots, have become very useful to us beyond their original intention of simulating grazing, because they're showing us other things. So you can kind of see behind me, you can see the line. So this is a different treatment, and this over here is the frequent mow. And so these plots always look kind of like a golf course. They're always short like this. And part of that is that we mow them 3 times a year, but even it's several months in between mows. And so even between that, they stay short. So what's happened over time is we've pushed it to these shorter species, but we haven't damaged the diversity. The diversity is still very high. So just right here at my feet, I've got antelope horn, which is a pollinator plant. I've got Texas grama. I've got some bladderpod. I've got some anemone. And so there's just a diversity of smaller statured plants all living in the same place. And we've looked at these plots a lot to figure out what is this community, because we're not putting any water on it, we're not fertilizing it, they're surviving on their own, and it's very diverse. It's a multi-species community. And so that's useful to us in urban applications as well as wildland applications. And so we were looking at these plots as we started looking at multi-species turf grass. We were looking at them as we started developing green roof mixes, because we're trying to figure out what are those functional communities that exist out here and can handle these kinds of conditions, and what grows together naturally. And so these plots have been a jumping off point for other research. These are our turf grass plots. And so we took species that we found out in the short grass prairies that we have on those frequent mow plots and recombined them and tested them to find a multi-species lawn that people could have that would function more like a natural system but still behave like a lawn. Similarly, we were looking at the research plots and all the species combinations we had out there to test different combinations that might work in green roofs, because the green roofs that were being used at the time in Texas were just not working. They were using temperate species that couldn't handle the conditions here. And so we looked at the natural communities and then we pulled them in and found a way to apply them to a more urban situation. So that's how this research has begun to provide more than we originally intended. And so we can start building into urban areas real pieces of nature that are functional and that are acting like natural communities. And we're using those natural communities as our base, but creating something new in these urban situations. This is one of our seasonal mow plots. This is a winter mow, so it gets mowed in the wintertime once every 2 to 5 years, the same time that the burns happen. And so we originally started this research to test the difference between mowing and burning and see if there's a difference. One of the reasons we started it. And so we have found that there is a difference. And one of the big differences between the mow plots and the burn plots is the buildup of thatch. So every year as the grasses die, or as you mow them, you get this laydown of organic material, which is called thatch. And it's a good thing in many ways. It acts as a mulch and it slowly breaks down and helps you build your soil. And so you want it a lot of the time. But on the infrequent mow plots, the plots that only get mowed every few years, this gets very, very thick and it doesn't break down very quickly. And so what happens is it starts to suppress germination. And so you still have a good cover, you just start to get fewer species over time. The smaller species that have trouble getting through the thatch just can't get up here. Whereas on the burn plots, this gets cleared off every few years, you get a chance at germination. This is a summer burn plot, so it's burned in the summer once every 2 to 5 years. And so this is the treatment that most closely resembles the natural fire return. Most of our fires would have been in the summer. When it's dry, you get dry lightning, starts a fire, spreads. Native Americans also started fires in different seasons, but still most of them were occurring in the summer, specifically the late summer. And so what we're seeing on these plots is it's still a very grass-dominated system. We see reduction of brushy areas, but we're seeing also a lot more forbs. The grasses are dominant, but they're not as dominant as they are on the winter plots. And so you can see some other species. So this grass next to me is called little blue stem, and it's called one of the grandfathers of the prairie. It is one of the grasses that was dominant across most of central Texas at one time. It's also a grass that cattle like to eat a lot, and so it's one that tends to get grazed out eventually. But here at the Wildflower Center, it's starting to recover. And so this is a recovery stand. Right about there was a juniper that died, and we burned it, and so now it's gone. But underneath it, these little grasses were hiding, and as we've burned over the years and have removed grazing, they have spread. And so you can see how far it's spread behind me. When I started here, this was just a little tiny clump right here, and they're spreading. And so we like this because this is one of the big grasses of the prairie. It's one of the foundation species. And these grasses grow differently than a lot of the invasive grasses like king ranch bluestem. So they're a dense clump with a really deep, really dense root system. And what happens is there's actually space in between them that ends up filled with other species. And so you get a higher diversity when these are the dominants versus when king ranch bluestem is the dominant. So we're excited to see these guys coming back. So this is a fall burn that was recently burned. And so we're now in spring and we're getting a little bit of rain. And so we're seeing everything resprout. So these little clumps here are little bluestem, and they were present during the burn. What the burn did was it took off their tops, and now they're resprouting. They look like little hedgehogs. So that's an important thing to note, is these prescribed fires generally are not killing a lot of the grasses. They're just taking the tops off. And that's good for the grass because a lot of them actually need their tops taken off either by grazing or by burning periodically, or they get what you call decadent. They're basically choking in old material. The other thing that it does is for one season opens up this ground and gives us some bare ground. And you don't want bare ground very long or very often, but you want it occasionally because it leaves sites where seeds can get in and get started. Whereas when these guys are grown up, it's hard for anything to get germinated underneath them. Things do, but it's a little easier for the seeds to get in contact with the soil. And so we like to do this periodically to just keep rejuvenating the system. And as you can see, I spoke about this earlier with the little bluestem. They grow in these clumps. And they are always about 18 inches apart. They kind of self-space. And what that does is it lets the smaller things grow in between them, even when they grow up. This is a control plot. So on these plots, we don't do anything to them except monitor them twice a year with everything else. And so what's happened to them over time is that the brushy component has grown up more and more, and the grass component has shrunk. The diversity is not bad on these plots, but we are losing the grassland areas, and the woody areas are taking over. This is what a lot of Central Texas looks like right now for that exact reason. It doesn't get much land management, and natural fires have been suppressed. So we've seen an expansion of this kind of brushy area. Behind me, I have an oak motte that hasn't had any land management for many years. It's on one of our control plots. And so what you can see is the oaks themselves have quite a bit of brush underneath them that's growing right up against the trunk all the way up into the branches. And while that low brushy layer is good in many cases, it can get too dense, and it can also make the entire community less resilient to fire. So most of the time when a fire approaches it, it'll get to that edge and it'll just go out. It won't go into it. But when it's been very dry, very hot for a long time, once the fire does get in, having that much brush underneath your oaks, underneath your bigger trees, not just oaks, makes it much more likely for you to get a crown fire. And a crown fire is very difficult to contain. And so when we're thinking about land management, we tend to be thinking about diversity of species, but also of ages of plants, but then also of structure. So we want a lot of those little brushy species. We just don't want them to get so dense that they're threatening the rest of the community. So I'd just like to show you a few more burn effects that were not apparent in the videos. So this is a tree that's had a burn go under it quite recently. And what you can see here is the lower branches are browned out, and we might have killed a few of those branches, but we didn't kill the upper ones. And so when you get frequent low intensity fires moving under these trees, what happens is that you tend to limb them up a little bit, but you don't tend to kill the tree. And what this does is it makes the tree itself more likely to survive a wildfire. So here, the tree on the right has had 7 fires run underneath it. And so you can see its trunk. And whereas the trees on the left have had no fires, and so you can't see their trunk, they're completely surrounded by brush. And the only difference is the fire, that the tree on the right used to have that much brush. But so if today we get a wildfire run through there, it'll pass right underneath that tree on the right. But the one on the left, because when wildfires go through, it tends to be the hottest, driest day of the year, it's much more likely that that tree will get fire up in its crown. So oddly, having more frequent low intensity fires makes the entire system more resilient to wildfire. And this is just an image of new germination coming in right after a burn. And then one more effect of burns that are different than mows is that the burns tend to be very patchy. And this is one of our plots, and the area that is unburned, the fire always goes out right there every time. And so the community in that little shaded patch is different than the one out in the open where the fire always gets it. And so one of the things that fire can give us is diversity across communities. So not only within communities, but we have different types of communities over space. And that's something that we're trying to encourage. Thank you guys for coming to our little research tour. And I should mention that as I'm recording this in spring of 2021, we are working with a postdoctoral researcher named Sean Griffin, who is analyzing all 20 years of our data. So pretty soon we'll have even more results to share with you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. That was super interesting. So now we can do a little Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box or in the chat. I guess I have a question we could start out with. I'm curious about how the plot you had where it had just been burned and there was a lot of open ground between little, you used to call them hedgehogs of grass, I think. I'm curious how prescribed burns help with like seed dispersal and you said it was really great for germinating new seeds. So how does the burn help disperse those seeds?
It doesn't so much help with dispersal. It helps with allowing the seeds to make good contact with the ground.
Okay.
And it also allows the seedlings to be a little bit less shaded out by the grasses for just a month or two early in the season.
Interesting. All right, looks like we have a question. Which treatments will increase floristic diversity for pollinators?
That's a good question. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. So what we're finding is there's no one specific answer. It's species specific, depending on which species you're trying to encourage or not. Though that said, because the historic fires in this area were in the summer, that is actually where we're seeing the highest diversity. We're also seeing a little bit of bare ground a little bit longer, which is good for the pollinators. So if my only goal is to increase diversity, I would go with summer burns. But usually you have more than one goal. So the short answer is summer burns. The longer answer is you really need to assess your entire property and think about all of your species and what you're trying to encourage.
All right, well, if there's no other questions, we can give it just another second. But thank you so much for being here, Michelle. Really appreciate it. Really cool to see those burns on video and aerially.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks so much. And to all our participants here, just want to plug that we have a full 5 more days of Public Gardens Days tours. So every evening through Saturday, you go to gopublicgardendays.org. You can see the lineup and see other gardens that are participating locally. So yeah, hope you can join us for another session in the future. And thank you so much for being here tonight. Have a good evening.